Missing for 6 months, found by Lakota warriors, her civilized town called her savage. The wooden fences and dirt streets seemed to cage her dreams, the neatly painted houses and polite neighbors acting as if life could only exist inside those boundaries. She often wandered the outskirts, where the plains stretched endlessly, golden grasses swaying in the wind. The locals whispered about those who strayed too far, calling them careless, foolish, or worse. Leela never cared. Something in her soul craved freedom, a life that was not dictated by the rules of civilized society. One evening, just as the sun dipped behind the distant hills, Leela saddled her horse and rode out toward the western plains. The town lights glimmered behind her, but she did not look back. She had felt a strange pull that day, a shimmering glow on the horizon, moving like fire but too steady, too precise to be natural. The people of her town would have laughed, calling it imagination or foolish fear. But Leela knew there was something there, something that called to her, and she could not resist. For hours she rode, the wind cutting across her face, her heart pounding with anticipation and fear. The sky darkened, stars blinking into existence one by one. Then she saw them, strange lights hovering and shifting in patterns she had never seen. They pulsed softly, almost breathing as if alive. Her horse whinnied nervously, ears pinned back, sensing danger. Leela held it steady, staring at the moving glow. She could feel her pulse quicken, her mind racing with questions she had no answers to. What were these lights? Who or what was behind them? She approached cautiously, following the strange signals across the plains. The grasses whispered beneath her boots, and the air smelled different here, metallic and sharp. Suddenly, a low hum rose from the ground, vibrating through the soles of her boots and into her bones. Her horse shied, but she calmed it, gripping the reins tightly. Then she saw movement, a figure or several darting in the distance, faster than any animal she had ever seen. They seemed to be watching her, though she could not understand why. As she ventured closer, the ground under her feet shifted unnaturally. Small machines, half hidden by the grass, crawled with mechanical precision, lights flashing on their tiny surfaces. Leela froze, feeling the gravity of the moment. This was no ordinary night, no ordinary threat. She could see patterns in the machine's movements, as if they were scanning, mapping, learning. Her heart raced. If anyone from her town had seen this, they would have screamed or turned back immediately. But Leela did not. The hours passed like minutes as she moved cautiously, keeping the machines in sight. Then, without warning, a strange beam of light enveloped her. It was warm, almost comforting, yet filled with energy she could feel deep in her chest. She tried to pull away, but her horse was rooted in place, frozen as if the wind itself had stopped. Leela felt herself lifted slightly, her surroundings bending in impossible ways. Colors she had never seen swirled before her eyes, greens and blues and purples that glimmered like jewels. Her mind struggled to comprehend it all. When she came to, she was no longer on the plains. The ground beneath her was smooth, metallic, and glowing faintly. Strange shapes moved silently in the distance, towering above her like giants. She could hear humming and soft whispers in a language she did not know. Panic rose in her chest, but she remembered the calm she always carried when the plains tested her. She breathed deeply and began to observe. Survival had always been a lesson learned on her own, and she would not forget it now. Days or maybe weeks passed in a blur. Time felt strange in this new place. Leela adapted quickly. She learned to move silently, avoiding the creatures that watched her with unblinking eyes. She discovered shelters among the strange structures, hidden alcoves that protected her from the cold hum of the machines above. Her clothing wore thin, her hands roughened by climbing, crawling, and crafting. She scavenged parts from small devices, learning their functions with instinctive cleverness. Each day she grew stronger, her mind sharper, her body more agile. Despite the danger, Leela began to feel a strange connection to the place. The machines moved in patterns she could predict. The glowing structures pulsed with energy she could almost understand. She experimented, touching circuits and wires, discovering ways to manipulate them, bending the alien technology to her will. In her solitude, she became a student of the unknown, a survivor who learned faster than any human should have to. She realized that the skills that would have seemed savage to her town were the very ones keeping her alive. Meanwhile, back in her town, Leela's disappearance caused panic. Search parties were sent out, but the vast plains seemed endless. Days turned to weeks and weeks into months. The town began to whisper rumors. Some claimed she had been taken by bandits, Others said she had gone mad, that she had chosen to live among the wild, rejecting society. Many spoke of her in hushed tones, calling her reckless and foolish. No one understood what had really happened, and those who feared the unknown labeled her savage, though they had never seen the strength, the courage, or the wisdom she had gained. Leela survived not because of luck, but because of her resilience. Her connection to the land, the plains, the wind, the sun, and even the storms gave her strength. She learned to read the movements of the machines, to predict their patterns, and to avoid traps before they could catch her. She built tools and simple devices from scraps she found, testing them carefully, learning their limits. Every day was a lesson in patience and ingenuity. She spoke little, for there was no one to hear her voice, yet her mind was alive, constantly planning, analyzing, and adapting. Then one morning the horizon changed. Figures appeared in the distance, humans, but not from her town. Their clothing and demeanor marked them as warriors, people attuned to the land in ways similar to her own instincts. Their horses moved steadily, eyes alert, scanning the plains. Leela's heart leapt. She approached cautiously, unsure if these were friends or threats. The warriors stopped at a distance, observing her with careful respect. There was no fear in their eyes, only recognition, as if they understood someone had survived the impossible. The leader of the group, a tall man with eyes sharp as hawks, stepped forward. He spoke in a language she did not know, yet his tone was calm, commanding, and protective. Leela responded with gestures, showing she meant no harm. Slowly, through motions and shared understanding, she realized they were offering help, not danger. Relief washed over her. For the first time in months, she did not feel alone. As the Lakota warriors led her through the plains, she told fragments of her story, how she had survived the strange lights, the alien machines, the lessons she had learned. They listened without judgment, nodding with respect. Leela could see that they valued her courage and her knowledge, not the labels of civilized or savage that her town had tried to impose. In their eyes, she was someone who had faced the unknown and adapted, someone whose strength came not from comfort, but from struggle and survival. The journey back was not easy. The plains still held dangers, and Leela moved with caution, guiding the warriors through areas she had learned to avoid. Her instincts, honed over months alone, proved invaluable. Together, they navigated the uncharted lands, forming a quiet bond of trust. The warriors shared stories of their own lives, of the land and the spirits they revered, teaching Leela ways to connect with the environment she had come to know so intimately. As night fell, Leela looked back toward the distant lights of her town. She felt a mixture of fear, anticipation, and defiance. They would not understand her, not yet. They would call her wild, reckless, perhaps even savage. But she no longer feared their judgment. She had learned something far greater, strength, courage, and knowledge that could not be taken away. For the first time, she realized that survival was only part of the story. The other part was understanding herself, her power, and the truth of the world beyond narrow fences and small minds. And so, Leela rode with the Lakota warriors under the starlit sky, her mind alive with possibilities. The plains stretched before them, wide and endless, filled with dangers and wonders she had only begun to understand. She had been missing for 6 months, and when she returned, she would not be the girl who had left. She would be someone stronger, wiser, and ready to face both the wilds of the plains and the judgments of those who had called her something she was not. The night whispered secrets only she could hear. Lights flickered in the distance, machines hummed faintly, and the wind carried the scent of strange metal and earth. Leela breathed deeply, feeling the pulse of the land beneath her feet. Somewhere out there, the world had changed, and she had changed with it. She was ready to meet whatever came next. The morning sun stretched across the plains as Leela and the Lakota warriors continued their journey. The golden grass shimmered under the light, and the distant hills seemed to ripple like waves. Leela's mind was alert, her senses sharpened after months of surviving alone. She had learned to notice the smallest details, a shift in the wind, the faint trace of footprints, the subtle hum of machines hidden beneath the earth. Today, she felt both anticipation and unease. She knew that the journey back would be far more dangerous than her months of solitude. The warriors moved with calm precision, their horses stepping lightly over uneven terrain. They communicated with quiet signals, eyes scanning the horizon. Leela followed closely, adapting to their rhythm. Though she had learned to survive alone, there was comfort in moving with people who understood the land. Their presence made her feel stronger, yet she could not shake a nagging thought. Her town awaited her return, and they would not welcome her the way the warriors had. By midday, they reached a narrow canyon, its walls rising like sentinels against the sky. Strange sounds echoed from the shadows, the soft scrape of metal, a distant mechanical whir, and the occasional bird cry. Leela felt her pulse quicken. She had learned that danger often lurked where the land seemed most ordinary. She signaled the warriors to proceed with caution, pointing out small depressions in the ground that could hide alien devices. The warriors nodded, their trust in her growing with each careful observation. As they moved deeper into the canyon, Leela began to speak, recounting fragments of her experiences during her disappearance. She described the glowing machines, the alien structures, and the lessons she had learned in isolation. She spoke of the cold nights and the warm days, of hunger and fear, and of the strange satisfaction that came from solving problems that no human could have taught her. The warriors listened, their expressions serious, sometimes nodding, sometimes exchanging silent glances. "You have seen more than anyone from your town could imagine," said one of the older warriors, his voice low and steady. "You have survived not because of luck, but because you learned to move with the world, to understand its patterns." Leela looked at him, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and a touch of pride. "I had no choice," she said simply. "If I wanted to live, I had to learn. Everything was new, everything dangerous. I had to be ready for anything." The older warrior nodded. "That is why you are strong. And that is why we honor your courage." Her words settled into her mind. Strength, courage, respect, qualities she had never received from her town, which only labeled her reckless or foolish. Here, among the plains and the warriors, she felt a sense of belonging she had never known. She realized that her survival had transformed her, not just in skill, but in spirit. As they exited the canyon, the horizon shifted. Smoke rose in the distance, thin trails twisting into the sky. Leela's heart sank. She recognized the pattern immediately. A group from her town was searching for her. They had not given up, even after 6 months. The warriors noticed her change in expression and followed her gaze. "They come from your home," she said quietly. "They do not understand. They will see me as something I am not. They will call me savage." The warriors exchanged glances, their hands resting lightly on the hilts of their weapons. "Then we must move carefully," the older one said. "They will not understand you, but we will protect you." Leela felt a rush of gratitude. The Lakota warriors did not judge her. They accepted her as she was. She realized that the journey back to civilization would test not only her skills, but also her resolve. She had to face those who had once called her reckless, who had whispered about her as if she were dangerous simply for being different. The next day, they reached a shallow river that cut across the plains. The water was clear, reflecting the sky and the clouds above. Leela dismounted, kneeling to let her horse drink. The warriors followed suit, each tending to their animals with practiced care. Leela took a moment to observe her surroundings. The river marked a boundary between the wild lands she had grown to know and the structured life of her town. Crossing it would bring her closer to judgment, closer to a society that had never understood her. Yet she did not hesitate. She knew that returning was necessary. Not for the town's approval, but to prove to herself that she could face the world she had once fled. She helped the warriors guide their horses across the shallow water, balancing carefully on slippery stones. Her confidence in her own strength surprised her. The months of isolation had sharpened her instincts and taught her patience, endurance, and awareness. She had become someone capable of surviving not just the wilderness, but the unknown. That night, as they camped near the riverbank, Leela sat by the fire with the warriors. Flames danced in the darkness, casting shadows that flickered like living things. She shared more of her experiences, describing how she had built small devices from alien scraps, how she had observed the machines and learned to predict their movements. The warriors listened intently, asking questions, showing genuine interest. For the first time, she felt that her knowledge mattered, that it was valued, not dismissed. One of the younger warriors, a boy no older than 16, looked at her with wide eyes. "You survived alone?" he asked. "No one could do what you did." "I did what I had to," Leela replied. "It was dangerous. I was afraid every day, but fear teaches you how to move carefully. It teaches you to notice things others miss." The boy nodded slowly, absorbing her words. The older warrior smiled. "She has learned from the world in ways we cannot imagine," he said, And now she will teach us if we listen carefully. As dawn broke, Leela felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. The town drew closer with every mile, and she knew that they would not welcome her return with open arms. They would not see the wisdom, the courage, or the strength she had gained. They would see only the months she had spent outside their control, the skills they considered unnatural. But Leela had changed. She no longer feared their judgment. She had faced the unknown and survived. She had learned to trust herself, to understand the patterns of both nature and the strange technology that had tested her limits. Now she would face her town, not as the girl they had labeled reckless, but as someone who had endured, learned, and grown stronger than anyone could have imagined. As they approached the outskirts of her town, Leela slowed her horse. She could see the familiar shapes of buildings, the dust rising from the streets, and the small figures moving about. People paused in their tasks, sensing the approach of travelers. Leela's heart raced, but she held her head high. The warriors flanked her, their presence a silent shield against judgment and fear. The town's main street was quiet when they arrived. Some townspeople emerged from their homes, whispering to each other, pointing at Leela. Their eyes widened and mouths opened in surprise and disbelief. She looked at them steadily. She was not the same girl who had disappeared months ago. Her clothing was worn and patched, her hands rough from work, her eyes sharper, filled with knowledge and experience. She had survived a world they could not imagine, and now she returned unbowed and unafraid. A man stepped forward, his face twisted with anger and confusion. "Leela, what happened to you? Where have you been?" Leela met his gaze calmly. "I survived," she said simply. "I faced what you could not. I learned what you would not understand." Whispers spread through the crowd. Some called her reckless. Others muttered that she had gone mad, but the warriors stood beside her, silent and unwavering. They did not judge her. They recognized her strength, her courage, and her skill. Leela felt a strange sense of peace. The town might not understand her, might not accept her, but she no longer needed their approval. She had endured the impossible, learned from it, and returned stronger. The judgments of others could not diminish what she had gained. As the sun set behind the distant hills, Leela stood with the warriors at the edge of the town. She knew that the coming days would be challenging. Some would try to force her back into their narrow view of civilized life. Some would mock her for what they considered wild or savage. But she was ready. She had survived the unknown, and she would face the judgments of her town with the same courage that had carried her through the wilderness. The plains stretched beyond the town, wide and endless, filled with dangers and mysteries that she had learned to navigate. Leela realized that her journey was far from over. She had survived 6 months of isolation, faced strange technology, and learned the ways of the land. Now she would confront a world that had judged her, not for what she was, but for what they feared she had become. She breathed deeply, feeling the wind on her face. The journey back had begun, and with the Lakota warriors beside her, she felt ready for whatever awaited. The town might call her savage, but she knew the truth. Strength, courage, and wisdom were not defined by fences, rules, or narrow minds. They were defined by action, resilience, and the will to survive. And Leela, after 6 months of the unknown, was more alive and powerful than anyone in her town could have imagined. The town had changed little in 6 months, but to Leela, it felt smaller, narrower, and more rigid than ever. Its wooden houses and dusty streets seemed to mock her with familiarity, as if nothing had happened while she had been gone. The townspeople had gathered in clusters, whispering, pointing, and staring. They stared at her hands, rough and scarred, at her worn clothes, at the intensity in her eyes. Many called her reckless. Some muttered the word savage. They did not understand what she had survived. They did not understand how much she had learned. The Lakota warriors stayed close, forming a protective circle around her. Their horses shifted nervously, sensing the tension in the air. Leela walked with measured steps, her head held high, refusing to shrink under the town's judgment. She knew she had changed. She had faced danger, learned, adapted, and survived. No whispers, no fearful eyes could take that away from her. A group of townsmen stepped forward, their leader a tall man with a stern face and a scowl that seemed permanently etched into his skin. "Leela," he said sharply, "where have you been? What has happened to you? You cannot return like this, wandering the plains and—" "You do not understand," Leela interrupted, her voice steady. "You cannot see what I faced, you cannot know what I learned, you only see what you fear. You call me reckless, you call me savage, but I survived. The man's eyes narrowed and he motioned for others to step closer. "This is not your place anymore," he said. "You belong in the town under rules and guidance, not roaming the wilderness." Leela's gaze swept across the crowd. She could see disbelief, anger, and fear mirrored in their faces. Some mothers pulled their children close. Men tightened their grips on makeshift weapons. The judgment was heavy, but it did not touch her. She had learned to trust herself, to know her own strength. The Lakota warriors, silent and unflinching, reinforced that trust. Suddenly, a distant hum reached their ears, low and rhythmic. The ground beneath their feet vibrated slightly. Leela froze, her senses alert. She turned her eyes to the horizon and saw them. Machines, moving faster than anything natural, gliding over the plains with precise alien motion. Their surfaces glimmered under the sunlight, lights blinking in unison, casting strange reflections. The townspeople gasped, some pointing, others backing away in fear. "These are not ours," Leela said quickly, stepping forward. "They are not from this town. They are the machines I told you about. They are dangerous." Panic spread quickly. Men shouted, some drawing crude weapons, others hurting townspeople behind them. The machines moved closer, scanning as if searching for something or someone. Leela felt a surge of adrenaline. She had prepared for this. She had learned to predict their movements, to read the patterns, to anticipate their actions. "Step back," she ordered the warriors and townspeople alike. "We can stop them, but we must be careful. If you rush, you will be harmed." The leader of the townsmen hesitated, then reluctantly stepped back. Leela knelt, examining the devices she had crafted during her time away. Simple components, some from the wilderness, some from alien scraps, had been fashioned into tools she could use to disrupt the machine's patterns. She checked the mechanisms, adjusting wires and circuits, her hands moving with the skill of months of practice. The machines advanced, their lights brightening, pulsing like a heartbeat. They seemed to respond to the town's fear, moving faster, scanning more aggressively. Leela felt the familiar rush of focus she had learned in the wilderness, her mind calculating each step, each possible outcome. She directed the warriors to flank the machines, using the terrain to their advantage. Small devices she had prepared emitted pulses that caused the machines to hesitate, buying precious seconds. The townspeople watched in awe and fear as Leela orchestrated the defense. The girl they had labeled reckless now commanded both humans and machines with calm authority. She moved between the warriors, giving quick instructions, signaling maneuvers with subtle gestures. Her months of isolation, of facing dangers alone, had transformed her into someone others could rely on. One of the machines advanced too quickly, aiming directly for the townsmen. Leela sprang into action, placing a small device in its path. A pulse erupted, and the machine staggered, its lights flickering. She moved swiftly to another, using her knowledge of patterns to disrupt its movement. The warriors followed her lead, striking with precision, their arrows and spears working in unison with her tactics. The town had never seen such coordination. Fear turned to amazement as they realized that the girl they had called savage was now their unexpected savior. Her knowledge of the unknown, her courage under pressure, and her ability to adapt had turned the tide. Even the leader who had doubted her found himself relying on her commands. Hours seemed to pass in minutes as the battle unfolded. Leela's mind remained sharp, analyzing, adjusting, and predicting. She realized that the machines were not mindless. They learned, adapted, and responded to the environment. She had to stay one step ahead, using both instinct and intelligence to protect the town and the warriors. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the machines withdrew, retreating toward the horizon, their lights dimming as they disappeared into the distance. The plains grew quiet again, the wind whispering through the grass. Leela exhaled, her body trembling from the effort and tension. She had succeeded. She had protected both the warriors and her town, proving her strength and skill in a way that no words could. The townspeople approached cautiously, their expressions a mix of awe and confusion. They looked at Leela, at her hands and clothes, at the determination in her eyes. Some whispered apologies. Others remained silent, unable to reconcile the girl they had condemned with the woman who had saved them. The leader stepped forward, his expression softened by realization. You have changed," he said slowly. "You are not reckless, you are not savage. You have survived, and you have taught us all something we could not have imagined." Leela met his gaze evenly. "I did not do this to teach you," she said quietly. I did this to survive and protect. What you choose to call me is your decision. I know who I am, and that is enough." The Lakota warriors nodded in agreement, their silent presence reinforcing her words. They had seen her courage, her intelligence, and her resilience. They had recognized her as one of their own, someone who understood both the land and the unknown forces beyond it. As night fell, the town gathered near the riverbank to regroup and assess the damage. Leela remained alert, her mind still calculating, still prepared for another attack. The experience had taught her that survival required constant awareness, that danger could return at any moment. But she also felt a new sense of confidence. She had faced her past, her fears, and the unknown, and had emerged stronger. The townspeople, once quick to judge, began to see her in a new light. They realized that courage, knowledge, and adaptability were not defined by appearances or conformity to rules. Leela had demonstrated that true strength came from action, resilience, and the willingness to face the unknown. By the following morning, the town had settled into a cautious calm. Leela worked alongside the warriors and townspeople, helping to repair what had been damaged and reinforcing defenses. Her presence, once a source of fear and judgment, now inspired respect. People approached her cautiously, asking questions, seeking guidance, and offering assistance. Leela felt a quiet satisfaction. She had returned not just as a survivor, but as a bridge between worlds, the town that had judged her and the wilderness that had shaped her. She realized that her journey was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, decisions to make, and dangers to face. But she was no longer the girl who had vanished. She was someone who had faced the impossible and learned from it. As she looked out across the plains, the sun rising behind distant hills, Leela understood that her identity was no longer defined by her town's narrow view. She had become something greater, a survivor, a strategist, and a protector. She had faced both human and unknown forces and had emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident in herself. The plains stretched endlessly, filled with secrets and dangers she had only begun to understand. Leela knew that she would continue to explore, to learn, and to face whatever challenges came next. She had survived 6 months of isolation and returned stronger than anyone could have imagined. Now she would face the world fully prepared, with courage, knowledge, and the strength that came from overcoming the impossible. And though the town might still call her savage, Leela knew the truth. True strength was not in following rules or fitting in. It was in survival, in courage, in learning, and in facing the unknown without fear. And Leela, after 6 months of the wilderness and its trials, had more of that strength than anyone around her could comprehend. The plains were quiet, almost eerily so in the early morning light. Leela stood at the edge of the town, watching the golden grasses sway under the breeze. Her horse shifted beneath her, muscles tensed and alert, reflecting the tension she still carried. Though the alien machines had retreated the day before, Leela knew the threat was not gone. She had learned the wilderness was patient, and danger could return when least expected. The Lakota warriors had camped nearby, their horses grazing, eyes always scanning the horizon. They respected her courage and her leadership, and she, in turn, trusted their instincts. Together, they had survived impossible challenges, faced machines that no ordinary human could understand, and navigated the perilous plains with skill and strategy. Leela felt the bond between them, a quiet kinship formed through shared danger and mutual respect. The townspeople moved cautiously around the perimeter, whispers floating through the streets like drifting dust. Many had come to realize that Leela was not reckless, not foolish, not savage as they had feared, but old habits die slowly. Some still regarded her with suspicion, unsure whether to admire her courage or condemn her for defying their rules and expectations. As Leela rode through the town square, she noticed children hiding behind their parents' legs, peeking at her with wide, curious eyes. She remembered herself at that age, curious, restless, longing for the world beyond fences. She offered a small, reassuring smile. Her presence, once a cause for fear and judgment, now carried a quiet authority. She had faced the unknown and returned stronger. That strength radiated, and even those unsure could sense it. The town's leader approached again, his expression softened by the events of the previous day. He had seen her in action, witnessed her bravery and ingenuity, and could not ignore the truth. "Leela," he said cautiously, "we owe you our respect. You have shown courage and skill beyond what we imagined. You saved many lives." Leela studied him carefully. "I did not do this for praise," she said simply. "I did it because it had to be done." Fear and judgment have no place when survival is at stake. The man nodded, swallowing hard. "Then, perhaps we have judged you too quickly. Perhaps we were wrong." Even as some townspeople whispered apologies, Leela's attention was drawn to the horizon. A faint shimmer of light appeared among the grasses, far away but unmistakable. The machines were returning. Their movement was deliberate, scanning, assessing. She felt a surge of adrenaline, not fear, but focus. Months in the wilderness had prepared her for this moment. She had faced unknown threats, and she was ready again. "Everyone listen," Leela said, her voice calm but commanding. "The machines are returning. We cannot fight them with fear. We must act with skill and strategy. The plains are our advantage if we use them wisely." The warriors nodded, immediately moving to positions that allowed them to defend both the town and themselves. Leela checked her devices, small but powerful tools she had built from alien scraps and natural materials. Each one emitted pulses designed to disrupt the machine's coordination. She had spent weeks learning their patterns, predicting how they would move and react. The machines approached, glowing softly in the morning light. Their humming filled the air, low and persistent, vibrating through the ground. Leela's heart remained steady. She had learned patience and observation. She had learned to adapt. Survival required both courage and intelligence. As the first machines reached the edge of the town, Leela activated a device, sending a pulse that caused them to stagger. The warriors followed her lead, using the terrain, the fences, and the narrow streets to funnel the machines into traps. Arrows flew, spears struck, and small devices disrupted their coordination. The townspeople watched in awe, some helping where they could, others frozen in disbelief. One machine, larger and more aggressive than the others, moved toward the central square. Leela acted quickly, placing another device in its path. A pulse erupted, and the machine faltered, sparks flying from its surface. She adjusted the wires, sending another pulse that caused it to collapse. The crowd gasped. They had never seen anyone act with such skill and courage. Through the battle, Leela remained calm, her mind analyzing, predicting, and directing. She moved between the warriors, signaling maneuvers, guiding them through the chaos. Her months alone had honed her instincts to perfection. She was no longer just a girl who had disappeared. She was a leader, a strategist, a protector. The machines began to retreat again, their movements slower, hesitant. Leela understood their patterns now. They were cautious, calculating, aware of the human resistance. She and the warriors pressed forward, carefully forcing them back across the plains. The townspeople began to step forward, assisting where they could, inspired by her example. What they had once called savage had become their hope, their shield, their guide. When the machines finally disappeared over the horizon, the plains fell silent. Leela breathed deeply, feeling the tension leave her body. The town was safe, for now, but she knew the lessons of survival would remain. Strength, courage, intelligence, and adaptability were what had protected them. Labels like reckless or savage were meaningless in the face of real danger. The townspeople gathered around her, some hesitant, others eager. Children ran to her side, curious and wide-eyed. She knelt, letting them touch her hands, showing them the marks of months in the wilderness, not scars of weakness, but proof of endurance and learning. Adults stepped forward slowly, offering quiet nods of respect. The town's leader approached once more, holding out his hand. "Leela," he said, "you have taught us all a lesson. We cannot judge courage or skill by appearances or rules. You are part of this town, whether we understand it or not." Leela looked at him steadily, considering his words. "I do not need approval," she said. "I need understanding. And I have found that with those who respect strength and knowledge, not with those who fear difference." The warriors nodded in agreement, their eyes reflecting pride and respect. They had seen her courage, her intelligence, and her resourcefulness. She had proven herself not just to the town, but to the land, the plains, and the forces beyond. That evening, as the sun dipped behind distant hills, Leela walked through the streets with the warriors by her side. The town had changed in subtle ways. People no longer whispered behind hands. Instead, they spoke in low tones of admiration and curiosity. They began to understand that survival required more than rules and conformity. It required courage, learning, and action. Leela looked out across the plains, the wind lifting her hair. The horizon was wide and endless, filled with both danger and possibility. She knew that the world beyond the town still held mysteries, challenges, and unknown forces. but she also knew that she had the skills, courage, and determination to face whatever came next. The Lakota warriors gathered around the fire that night, sharing stories and laughter. Leela joined them, feeling a sense of belonging she had never experienced in her town. Here her knowledge and experience were valued, her courage was recognized, her survival had earned her respect, trust, and friendship. As stars appeared overhead, Leela reflected on her journey. 6 months ago, she had vanished into the unknown, feared lost or mad. She had faced alien machines, harsh wilderness, and solitude that would have broken most people. She had survived, adapted, and grown stronger. Now she returned to a town that once condemned her, but she had changed too. She had become someone who could navigate both worlds, the civilized and the wild, the known and the unknown. In the quiet of the night, Leela felt a sense of peace. She had faced fear, judgment, and danger, and had emerged stronger than anyone could have imagined. Her identity was no longer tied to the labels of others. She was a survivor, a strategist, a protector. She had learned that true strength came from courage, intelligence, and adaptability, not from following rules or fitting in. The next morning, Leela stood at the edge of the town once more. She looked toward the plains, toward the horizon, and toward the sky where alien lights had once glimmered. The journey had tested her in ways she could never have imagined, but it had also revealed her true potential. She had become someone who could face the unknown and thrive, someone whose courage and knowledge were undeniable. The town had learned a lesson too. Fear and judgment were weaker than courage and skill. Prejudice could not overcome experience and determination. Leela had shown them that survival, intelligence, and bravery were the true measures of strength, and they could not ignore it. With the Lakota warriors by her side, Leela mounted her horse. She took one last look at the town, no longer bound by its narrow expectations. The plains awaited her, endless and full of possibility. She felt the wind on her face, the pulse of the earth beneath her feet, and the quiet hum of knowledge and power she had gained. Leela rode into the horizon, free from judgment, armed with courage and wisdom, ready for whatever the future might hold. She had faced the unknown, survived impossible challenges, and returned stronger, wiser, and more confident than ever. She was no longer the girl who had disappeared. She was a force shaped by the wilderness, by alien technology, by courage, and by the determination to survive. And as the sun rose behind her, casting golden light across the plains, Leela knew that she belonged not to a town, not to the wilderness, but to herself. She was a survivor, a protector, and a bridge between worlds. And nothing, not fear, not judgment, not even the unknown, could change that.